She screamed into her stitched pillow every night, but the orderlies swore they heard nothing. The file says she walked into the woods, but her feet were shackled. Welcome to Ashcroft. Ashcroft Asylum was opened in 1008, standing solemn and proud on a desolate hill near Dyer's Hollow, Maryland. It was built from red brick that absorbed more than rain. It absorbed memory. The locals whispered that the cornerstone wept during storms, and that no moss ever grew on the western wall. Officially, Ashcroft was America's first institution for the care of the morally insane. Unofficially, it was a warehouse for the inconvenient, priests' daughters, midwives who knew too much, veterans who saw things they weren't allowed to describe. From the start, there were discrepancies. Patients who weren't listed, rooms that didn't match the architectural plans, a hidden level beneath the basement where doctors never went, but strange lights flickered beneath the floorboards. Families who sent their kin for rest received no letters. And when they asked for them back, no body, no name, just a letter of regret and a sealed affidavit. Every American asylum copied Ashcroft's blueprint, but Ashcroft itself was copied from something older and much darker. Something not meant for the healing of minds, but for the containment of things the mind could not survive. The founding physician, Dr. Elijah Wren, published no journals. He left no known writings beyond a single manifesto, the doctrine of silence. Bound in animal hide and locked in the asylum's East Wing library, it described the brain not as an organ, but a prison. To free the mind, he wrote, we must first silence it. Patients were not spoken to. They were not allowed to speak, and if they tried, they were punished with a procedure only noted as the quieting. Survivors, what few there were, spoke in gibberish or choked on their own words. One nurse wrote in her diary, their tongues forget language, their eyes forget light. She was fired for insubordination and hung herself 3 days later. Wren believed that some thoughts were contagious, that certain ideas could spread like disease, and Ashcroft's true mission was to quarantine such thoughts. Inside living people, a philosophy, a curse, something ancient, barely human, something not meant to be remembered. In the sublevels, old restraints can still be found, not just for wrists or ankles, but for mouths and ears, to silence what was already screaming inside them. Officially, Ashcroft was never meant to house children, but the bell tower wing, the oldest section, built atop the hollow grave of a Quaker chapel, tells another story. Small cots, dolls made of twine, a ring of chairs bolted to the ground, facing a blackened fireplace. From 1837 to 1852, 61 children were quietly admitted, never registered. Not one was released. No death certificates. No graves, only drawings etched into the plaster by tiny fingers, strange constellations, teeth with too many roots, and one repeated phrase, "We're still down here." In 1894, a coal worker restoring the sub-basement broke into a sealed chamber directly beneath the bell tower wing. What he found wasn't furniture, it was a circle of high-backed chairs, each with shackles. In the center, a pit filled with dolls and teeth. He fled the building and was never seen again. The bell tower has since collapsed. But the wind that passes through that hollow still hums like the whisper of a lullaby, the kind no child should ever hear. The town of Dyer's Hollow owes its entire economy to Ashcroft. By 1841, nearly half the town was employed in or around the asylum. Cooks, laundrywomen, coffin builders, and none of them asked questions. The town doctor certified hundreds of deaths without ever examining a body. Once a month, a wagon rolled through the town square at midnight, covered in black cloth, pulled by oxen that refused to look toward the asylum. Children were warned never to look out their windows during these nights. The ones who didn't speak for days. One carved the word inside into his own cheeks. By the 1870s, the town records were cleansed, census names vanished, death rates dropped suddenly. It was as if Dyer's Hollow erased its own past. But under the floorboards of the general store, someone hid a bundle of handwritten notes descriptions of patients clawing through the woods, of howls that never came from anything human, and of masked men who asked for silence. Not help, the town still stands today, but they won't speak of Ashcroft. Even when you stand in front of it, they'll insist it never existed. During the Civil War, Ashcroft received a new shipment, not of soldiers, but of children. War orphans, they were called, but no family names were recorded, only numbers carved into their shoulder blades. A hidden storage room was uncovered in 1912 during a botched renovation. Inside were 12 industrial vats, sealed tight, ringed with wax and Old Testament symbols. Inside, human remains suspended in brine. The bodies had not decayed, but their mouths were permanently open, as though they had been screaming for over 50 years. Doctors theorized cryogenics, but none could explain the fact that the eyes still blinked under flashlight. The orphans were part of an experiment Wren called the Severance, an attempt to remove trauma not from the mind, but from the blood. He believed certain families carried ancestral curses, and by bleeding them out, the children could be freed. But what was truly extracted was not trauma, it was something else, something that feeds on silence, on obedience, on forgotten names. One vat still remains sealed. No one dares open it, even when it taps from the inside. Ashcroft was designed by Elias Rowe, a Freemason architect known for cryptic designs and esoteric principles. He was obsessed with sacred geometry and claimed that certain angles could trap spirits or detain ideas. His design for Ashcroft used no right angles in patient rooms and layered 5 underground floors in a spiral descent, like a nautilus shell. In 1830, shortly after construction, Rowe vanished. All they found was a rolled blueprint, updated, annotated, and completely different from the approved plans. It showed corridors that didn't exist, stairwells that turned in on themselves, and a central chamber labeled the origin. Ashcroft's staff denied ever building such a room. But years later, explorers found a sealed iron door 5 floors down with Rowe's initials carved in Latin, "Intra me et obliviceris," enter me and forget. The door was welded shut from the inside. No one who went down there ever returned with the same eyes. One man pulled out his own teeth. Another began repeating coordinates in a dead language. Something about that blueprint, or the space it described, was meant to be forgotten. Perhaps Rowe wasn't lost. Perhaps he was still inside, folded into the walls. Ashcroft once held Sunday services, mandatory for all patients, but there were no sermons, only music. A choir composed of the institution's most unstable residents, those who never spoke during the week, yet sang with perfect harmony on Sundays. Their songs were in no known language. The melodies were ancient, dissonant, and mathematically impossible. They defied traditional scales. One visitor described it as a lullaby for the dead, sung backwards. In 1873, a linguist attempted to transcribe the choir's lyrics. After 19 days, he hung himself. His notes were confiscated, but one page remains in a private archive. A single phrase repeated, "We sang before flesh, and we will sing after bone." The choir pit still exists, blackened with soot and surrounded by scratch marks on the pews. Locals say if you place your ear to the iron railings at night, you can still hear the humming, but it's no longer singing, it's listening. To this day, no recording device has ever captured a sound in that hall. Only silence, and then static, and then something else. From 1842 to 1860, the east wing of Ashcroft experienced an architectural impossibility. Each year, the structure became newer, paint unpeeled itself. Floorboards hardened, rusted hinges shined like polished silver. Photographs from the period show impossible continuity. A 16-year gap between 2 images reveals identical details. No aging, no dust, the same moth on the window. The same shadow across the wall. Staff began to avoid the wing. Patients assigned their regressed into infantile states. One woman, age 64, began speaking in the voice of a toddler. She referred to the east wing as the belly. and claimed, "It keeps me safe so I don't get born." Wren believed the wing was a temporal anomaly, a womb of untime. When the asylum shut down in 1914, demolition crews were ordered to raise it first. The walls resisted, explosives misfired, metal blades bent. In the end, the wing simply disappeared. No rubble, no remains, just open earth, still smooth to this day, as if nothing had ever been built there. In 1859, Sister Magdalene arrived from St. Anne's Convent to bless Ashcroft after a rash of suicides. But she never left. She was neither blind nor mute, yet spoke to no one and wore a veil dark enough to blot out light. Her presence quieted the ward. Patients trembled when she walked past. The dogs refused to enter her corridor. Orderlies called her the nun without eyes. Rumors spread that she once served in an orphanage fire that left her touched by the veil between. Wren placed her in charge of room 17, a solitary cell said to drive nurses mad. She stayed there for 14 years, never aged, never slept, never fed. When authorities finally forced open room 17 in 1873, they found only a veil, folded perfectly, and a single handprint burned into the wall, not human. Not animal, the wallpaper had changed. It now depicted a fresco, children bowing before a robed figure with hollow sockets, her mouth open, her hands lifted, as if receiving something from beneath the floor. Magdalene's name was stricken from the Catholic registry. St. Anne's was demolished the following year. They say she visits the dying, to unmake what cannot be healed. In Ashcroft's hidden archives, there exists one diagnosis only given to 7 patients in its 85-year history. It was marked with a single word, burned into the leather cover, obelisk. Those marked with the obelisk diagnosis were immediately removed from all treatment and placed in non-locational containment, rooms without doors, recorded only in red ink. What made someone an obelisk? That part remains redacted. But from pieced-together staff journals, we know this: they didn't sleep. They wrote in ciphers that translated into impossible geometries. They all attempted to eat the eyes of other patients. One physician, Dr. Haldon, claimed the diagnosis was tied to a psychic infection that began in dreams and ended in language. Their mouths are tombs, he wrote. Every word they speak digs something up. The final obelisk patient was buried alive with their tongue nailed to their jaw. Even now, the original coffin is kept in an underground museum, bolted, lead-lined, whisper-proofed. It still rattles, and the sound it makes is not a voice. It's writing. Beneath Ashcroft's foundation, older than the asylum, older than the town itself, lies a subterranean chapel carved directly into bedrock. It was uncovered in 1886 during pipe renovations and sealed again within days. Why? Because the walls bled. The structure bore no Christian markings, no crucifix, no altar. Instead, crude human-like figures danced around a stone well in the center, each one missing its mouth. The room pulsed with a low frequency that cracked eardrums. 4 workers went deaf. One gouged out his own tongue. The well in the chapel wasn't for water. It was a hole, a perfect circle of blackness 9 feet wide, descending beyond visibility. Wren's final note before his disappearance simply read, "The choir was not our invention. The chapel was always singing. When federal agents arrived in 1901, they bricked the entrance and threatened the staff into silence." No records remain, only rumors and a faded blueprint with the chapel marked by a symbol no language can translate, a circle with a throat. Locals say during earthquakes, the ground near Ashcroft hums in a voice too old to be human. And always, always in harmony. In 1879, a girl named Clara was admitted to Ashcroft's children's ward after her foster mother claimed she spoke in too many names. Clara could recount the death of every resident, describe rooms she had never seen, and identify objects buried under the floorboards. When asked how she knew, she answered, "Because I've died here before." Staff assumed trauma. But Clara began reciting the asylum's unwritten history, including events that were never recorded but later confirmed through recovered documents. She spoke fluent Aramaic. She etched glyphs into her cell wall using fingernails, glyphs found in the buried chapel. Doctors began studying her as a phenomenon. They brought in skeptics, linguists, priests. One left screaming, another fell into a catatonic state. Clara just smiled and said he remembered too. In her final week, Clara refused food, water, or sleep. She placed her hands on the wall and said, "I will wake up when the chapel sings again." Her body was never found, only a patch of scorched floorboards in the shape of a child curled into herself. Her cell is still sealed. And sometimes, if you press your hand to the door, she holds it back. In 1893, Ashcroft reported a rare event. 17 patients deemed untreatable were suddenly cured and released. No symptoms, no trace of their disorders. But they were not right. Their families rejected them. They spoke in perfect monotone. They stared at walls for hours, murmuring prayers to gods no one had ever heard of, and they always insisted, "We are still inside." One committed murder with surgical precision. Another returned to the asylum gates weeks later and clawed her own eyes out in front of the guardhouse. The rest disappeared. Years later, secret memos revealed that these 17 were part of an experiment called the hollowing. Wren believed you could extract trauma by removing something else, identity. The cured weren't healed. They were vessels, emptied and filled with something else. Their beds were never reassigned, each room still locked, unentered. Ashcroft's final head nurse left a chilling warning in her resignation. 17 rooms, 17 whispers. Not one breath among them is human anymore. To this day, the number 17 is forbidden on all Ashcroft medical forms. And if you sleep near those rooms, you don't dream your own dreams. The 4th floor was shut permanently in 1902, not because of decay, fire, or damage, but because it wouldn't stop whispering. Patients assigned to the floor reported hearing voices from beneath the floorboards. At first, random words, then their own thoughts, spoken before they'd even thought them. Staff began to experience hallucinations. A nurse walked off the 3rd-story balcony, claiming she was only going downstairs. Another opened every window and screamed, "It's not my voice." Until she lost hers forever, an investigation discovered something chilling. The whispering floor had been constructed with reclaimed wood from a 1790 shipwreck known as the St. Apocryphon. That ship had once ferried plague victims to the New World and never made land. Ashcroft tried to strip the boards, but they found that the whispering wasn't in the wood. It was in the nails. Each whisper sounded like someone asking to be let out. The floor was encased in concrete. But the hallway still resonates at night. If you listen too closely, you don't just hear voices, you join them. In 1909, a janitor named Elias Cobb was tasked with cleaning out old plumbing below the West Wing. He never returned. When search teams followed his trail, they discovered he'd pried open a sealed brick tunnel behind a rusted grate. The passage wasn't listed on any map. Inside were hand-dug stairs leading down. Too far down, the tunnel descended for hours, spiraling in impossible geometry. Cobb left chalk marks on the walls. The deeper he went, the more deranged they became, eventually turning into symbols seen only in the chapel. His final message, carved in stone, read, "There's another Ashcroft beneath the Ashcroft." Then nothing, no body, no tools, just his boots, neatly placed at the edge of a circular hole, the kind made not by hands, but by waiting. The asylum sealed the stairwell, but Cobb's name still appears on the employee logs, clocked in, never clocked out. Sometimes on stormy nights, the lower halls smell of kerosene and fresh footprints, bare, wet, and ash cover, trail from the West Wing wall to the basement door and stop. Room 109 was known to staff as the mirror cell, but there was no mirror in it, just a polished steel panel riveted into the north wall. No matter what stood before it, nothing ever reflected. Patients assigned to 109 deteriorated within days. They began whispering to corners. They refused food. One drew pictures of themselves watching themselves, endlessly nested. One man bit off his own fingers, convinced that something was reaching through the wall, pretending to be him. It smiles when I don't. It watches when I blink. In 1904, a psychologist brought in a light meter and found that the cell absorbed more light than it emitted, as if the space itself was devouring vision. They tried to remove the panel. It wouldn't budge. When they finally peeled it back, they found not insulation, but bone, dozens of jawbones fused into the wall like bricks. The psychologist burned his notes, quit his practice, and moved to the desert to escape all reflections. He said, "Room 109 was sealed with molten iron. Even today, the wall behind it remains cold to the touch, no matter the season, and sometimes, when no one is looking, it hums." Her name was Eleanor Glass, admitted in 1881 after claiming she woke up with too many mouths. She could replicate the voices of others perfectly, even voices she had never heard, dead relatives, missing persons. One orderly swore she spoke in his father's voice, a man lost in the War of 1812. Doctors believed it was a psychological mimicry, until Eleanor began predicting deaths. Each time she would speak in the voice of the soon-to-die, saying only, "I'm almost done with this voice." She said she heard the chapel in her dreams, that it was full of mouths, floating like lanterns, waiting for someone to remember their names. Eventually, she refused to speak entirely. She wrote only once more in crumbling graphite, "If I speak again, I won't be me anymore." She died in silence. Her vocal cords, however, were perfectly intact. In fact, they were, grown over, replaced by something tougher, smoother, instrument-like. Some say you can hear her in old radio interference. Not a voice, but a sound moving between frequencies saying, "Tell my name to the chapel. It will know who I was." In the spring of 1912, Ashcroft closed its doors to the public for 6 days. No records were kept. No visitors allowed, but afterward 128 patients were gone. No transfer papers, no burials, no trace. Later discovered documents refer cryptically to the cacophony ritual. It was Wren's final procedure, designed to purge Ashcroft of what he called cumulative cognitive rot. The asylum wasn't just full of madness. It had become madness, a vessel, a memory hive. Wren believed the building itself had become sentient, and the only way to quiet it was to drown it in every voice at once. He gathered 128 patients into the central atrium, sealed the exits, and had them chant the choir's original dissonant melody. Backwards, what happened next is unclear, but the atrium was scorched, the walls were stripped bare, and the bricks themselves were bent. Wren vanished, the ash was never swept, and the remaining staff, nearly blind, refused to speak ever again. That room still stands, unchanged. Nothing grows near it. Not moss, not mold, not even time. They say it listens. They say it's hungry again. In 1947, nearly 3 decades after Ashcroft was shuttered, a Senate subcommittee found a file marked simply, Black Case 29, nay. It referenced Ashcroft Sanatorium and was sealed under federal security clearance. Inside, 412 names redacted, 6 reels of audio unreleased, 1 photograph, the chapel door, open, a single note attached to the back, read, "Ashcroft was never a place, it was a lock, and someone turned the key." That file was quickly resealed. The senator who uncovered it, Harold Krieger, was found drowned in his own bathtub, saltwater lungs, despite no access to seawater for 200 miles. An internal memo warned, "There may be others, other locks, other chapels. Do not pursue this line of inquiry. Seal and forget." But files leak and photographs age. What can't be sealed forever is the sound that echoes through certain state buildings at night. A dissonant hum, the echo of Ashcroft. Ashcroft was officially demolished in 1914, yet no photographs exist of its destruction, no rubble, no ruins, and still, people go missing near Dyer's Hollow. Campers disappear. Hikers vanish, compasses fail, and then there are the dreams. Across the country, people speak of the same nightmare. A long hallway, red brick, a choir behind iron doors. a nun with no eyes standing at the end. The asylum is gone, but something remembers. The land is still warm, still breathing, still whispering. Ashcroft is not a place, it is a pattern, a psychic wound, a template for forgetting. You were never meant to hear this story, but now you've stepped inside, and if tonight in your sleep you hear the floor creak, or the echo of a child's voice saying your name, don't answer, because it's already inside the walls and it remembers you.